Hello, I'm Dan Lewis, and welcome to Biblical Insights with Pastor Del. And now, Pastor Del Demosthenes.
We thank all of you for being here. We thank all of you for committing your time to do God's ministry in this church. I truly appreciate that. Our two texts from the lectionary today reminds me of a particular show. There are various variations of the show, of this type of show, but there's a show on TV. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but every now and then, when I'm clearing my mind, if it's on, I love to watch it. It's called Undercover Boss. This is a show where various high-ranking executive and oftentimes the very owner of that business, he or she will disguise themselves into not the highest position because they already play that role, but they will disguise themselves to the lowest position possible and intrude into the inner working of the place as the lowest person there, and then watch, pay attention to see how the workers work and how the workers treat one another and how the workers treat the customers. And then they'll stay as long as possible in disguise, watching, taking notes. And then afterwards, at the conclusion of the show, they'll invite certain people that they've observed and reveal themselves to them. And then 99% of the time, there will be a surprise. The workers will be like, whoa, that was you? Yeah. And some afterwards will begin to put two and two together. It says, yeah, I should have known this. But by that point, there is no room for making up anything. You're just going to get your grades. And if you've done well, you're going to be pleasantly surprised. And if you were a jerk, so to speak, you're going to be sadly surprised that you've been watched by the highest person and you blew it up. You messed up that opportunity. My brothers and my sisters, if you allow me in my own theological understanding, I'm not saying perfectly, but I think there is a way in which God operates that reminds me of undercover boss. God is the highest being there is. Yet, when he came in the format of Jesus Christ, he lowered himself, not for his sake, but for you, for our sake. He came and lived, died, suffered, and do a number of things to give humanity a chance to prove themselves, to say, if they truly love God. Then he tells them that he's going to go back, he's going to return. When he returns, he will reward everyone according to how they have lived. That's the basic teaching of Christianity. So, Jesus says he'll come back Yet, there's something interesting. Even though he left and says he will come back, but he wants to make sure that people truly love him. Not his status, not his money, not his wealth, not his capability to do things for them, but they truly love him. So what he did, in my humble opinion, during our journey now, he's living among us in disguise. Because he's living among us in disguise, allow me to ask you this question. If Jesus was to visit your house today, and you knew it's Jesus, how would you treat Jesus? Where would you have him enter? What would you serve him? What conversation would you get into? If Jesus was to visit your work and you knew it's Jesus, how would you work? What would you stop doing? What would you start doing that you're not doing? And if Jesus was to catch a ride with you in your car, what would you do differently and not do? And if Jesus was to stop at the side of the street begging for something, and you know it's Jesus, how would you behave? Easy question. We all would give Jesus the very best that we have, right? Some of us have, if you're part of my tradition, when I was growing up, there's certain vessels that as kids you don't get to see until certain people come to the house. I don't know if you've been part of that tradition, but I have. And there's certain type of vessels you don't get to see because, those plates are reserved for important folks. And when they come and, he's like, Mom, quickly grab them, clean them up, and the table, you're like, whoa, really? You got stuff like that? So, the majority of us, if not all of us, if we knew it was Jesus, we would put out, talking about the red carpet, it would be the best carpet you got. But sadly, but wisely, Jesus lived among us in disguise. He lived among us in disguise. And just like the undercover boss, if you already have the highest office and you come to disguise yourself, I'm about to drop a very powerful theological truth, at least I believe it's true, to you. If you already play the highest role and if you're going to disguise yourself, how would you come? I'll let you answer that question. How would you come? And if you know people tendencies, and if you know certain social norms, how would you come? The text of Hebrews says something that all of us will be better for knowing it. Text of Hebrews says, keep on loving each other as brothers. Do not forget to entertain strangers. Keep on loving one another and do not forget to entertain strangers. For by doing so, some people have entertained angels without knowing it. There are a lot of issues that people often view, like other sectors of life or other sectors of community, of society will get involved with them, and people will say, well, the church got no business getting involved with those kind of things. I mean, at best, if you got the time, you should pay attention to them, but if not, we got no business getting involved with this. I'm trying to be politically politically, because I know some of the issues we're going to cover are very politically charged. So I'm not taking one side or the other except my understanding of what Christianity says. Now, a lot of people, this issue of prison reforms is so politically charged, people look at it as, well, that's what this group does. That's what this group should focus on. We got no business thinking about that because that's none of our business. Really? Listen to what Jesus is about to say here. Jesus says, through this word, remember those in prison as if you were the fellow prisoners. Because if you can't put yourself in a situation, there's a way in which you find it easier to ignore it. My brothers and my sisters, I'm not telling you what certain people have take as, political stuff but what I'm saying is the issue of how prisoners are treated, it's a Christian issue. I'm getting blank stare because many of us are like, I don't know where he's going. Is he gonna go progressive on me? Is he gonna go conservative on me? I'm not interested in those things. But what I'm saying is this: the issue of prison reform, I didn't make it up. It's a Christian issue. Jesus says, think about those who are in prison as if you yourself were in prison. If you were in prison, okay, how would you want people to think about you? If you were in prison, how would you want people to think about you? Would you want people to completely forget about you and move on? Or would you want people to not forget about you and find a way to help bring some resolution to some stuff? So Jesus says, remember those in prison as if you were the fellow prisoners, as if you were there yourself. And those who are mistreated as if you yourself were suffering. People who have political power, who have financial power, who have social clout, oftentimes don't get as mistreated as other groups. But those who are disenfranchised, dispowered, they often get mistreated. Isn't that how it goes, whatever the society is? If you don't, you will be mistreated if you don't have certain power. So Jesus says, remember those who are being mistreated. So when you and I think about the least among us who are being taken advantage of, who are not being treated correctly, this is not a progressive issue. This is not a conservative issue. This is a Christian issue. We ought to think about, from a Christian perspective, what's happening to this group or that group. If they are being mistreated, is it right from God's perspective? This issue of how people lived among themselves in the household, this issue of marriage. This is not a progressive issue. This is not a conservative issue. This is a Christian issue. Jesus says marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. You're like, I should have stayed home today. Keep your lives free from the love of money. Oh, it's getting really interesting. Be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. And we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid what man can do. And he goes on to say, remember your leader who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus is the same today, the same yesterday, and today and forever. Do not carry away by all kinds of strange teachings. It is good for our hearts to be strengthened by grace, not by ceremonial foods, which are of no value to those who eat them. We have an altar from which those who minister at the tabernacle have no right to eat. The high priest carried the blood of animals into the most high place as a sin offering, but the bodies as burnt outside the camp. So Jesus also suffered outside the city gate to make the people holy through his own blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp, bearing the disgrace he bore. For here we do not have an enduring city, but we are looking for the city that is to come. There are a lot of people who want to keep religion about a bunch of rules and ceremonial stuff, where religion really, really, really meets the individual. They're not interested in it. We're going to see that in a minute. They're interested in a bunch of rules and traditions, but where the matters of religion should make a difference, they're not interested in them. So that's what it says. In verse 9 on, it says, it is good for our hearts to be strengthened by grace, not by ceremonial foods, which are of no value to those who eat them. That's some of the things that the people were making their focus rather than what really matters. By the time we get to verse 15, it says, through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that confess his name. And do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifice God is pleased. Do not forget to do good, because with such sacrifice God is pleased. The individuals, this idea of how they treat one another, they want to make it a personal thing. It is not a personal thing, my brothers and sisters. If you want to know the state of your relationship with God, look no further than how you treat other people in your life. If you want to know how good you love the Lord, look no further to how you treat the least among you. In 1 John chapter 4, it says, you cannot say you love God with all whom you do not see, and ignore people and mistreat people that you do see. That's a misunderstanding. Let's look about how Jesus lived his life. Now, Jesus disturbed the social norm of his day. We may not want to believe that, but Jesus wasn't trying to be political. But the way in which he lives his life and what he preached, disturbed the social norm of his day. Watch for a minute. He got invited to go to a very important party. He got invited to go to a very important party in Luke chapter 14, verse 1. It says, one Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of prominent Pharisee. Okay? He got the invitation to go to a very important party where the who's and who in that society will be there. Because the Pharisee, who was a very established person in that society, he was about to have a party, so he invited all important people, and people who know they're important. We'll see how they behave later. And Jesus got an invitation. Now, people would want you to believe and says, you cannot disturb, you cannot criticize the hands that feed you, only to the extent that they're doing right things. But when they're not doing right things, it doesn't matter who they are. You got to tell them right is right, wrong is wrong. Jesus disturbed the social norms, not in a way to be political, but in a way to preach the true message of society. You know why Christianity has very little value in society in a lot of places? That's because Christians don't really stand behind the true teaching. If you go over somebody's place for dinner, you appreciate what they're doing. But the moment they begin to talk, the moment they begin to denigrate other people, you got a decision to make here. You can't be, well, I'm at that table. I'm not trying to be, well, let's see what Jesus did here. He was among the who's and who having dinner. It says, one Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. There in front of him was a man suffering from dropsy. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law. He knew they were watching him because the previous chapter, when he healed somebody in the Sabbath, during the Sabbath in the synagogue, they criticized him. So he knew what he has. So in front of him, there was a need. But it's the Sabbath. It's tradition. You ought not to work on the Sabbath, but there is a need. Jesus says to the religious leaders and the experts, he says, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? They're like, oh, this is a tricky question. This is a tricky question because we don't want to say yes, because we know what he's going to do. Because he can't see a need and ignore a need. But if we say no, we know it's hypocritical because we know how we lived. So Jesus says, is it lawful to work on the Sabbath? They're like, we're not going to answer this question because we're not interested in the truth. We're not interested in doing what's right. We're just interested in keeping some tradition that we capitalize on, some tradition that keep us important in that society. So Jesus says, okay, since you're not going to answer the question, they remain silent. So taking hold of the man, he healed him. He healed the man because it didn't matter what the ceremonial things were. A need presented itself. Jesus, as a servant, took care of that need. It didn't matter whether it was the Sabbath or not, because Jesus cannot be in the presence of a need and ignore it. So what does that say for followers of Jesus Christ? Because that was the way he was living his life. Then he asked them, if one of you has a son or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull him out? They had nothing to say because they know they're being hypocritical. They burden people with a lot of things that they're not going to do themselves. They burden people with a lot of things that they're not going to do themselves because it favors them. My brothers and my sisters, you know, there's one little truth from my perspective that I'm beginning to really, really enjoy. I love people who lived with this duality of there are dependent folks folks who are dependent, and there are folks who are independent. I'm like, this is not true. Yesterday, I was talking to somebody about this. I said, the car you're driving, did you know how to make it? The person says, no. All I do is drive it. I says, well, then you need some people to do certain things for you, don't you? It's like, yeah. So people want to split the world into these two categories, want you to believe that some people are dependent, others are independent, and then they want you to believe that because they don't want to be dependent, because that would mean, okay, they're weak, they're low, they depend on other people, and they want you to tell you they're independent. Hence, everything they got, they did it by themselves. So, and if you can't do things the way they do things, if you can't have it, then it's your fault. And you don't deserve a hand up because they've gotten there by themselves. I like to say that's not true, folks. That's not true. The real world is a lot more interdependent. What you need might not be what I need, but you need something. What I need might not be what you need, but I need something, and I know that. So, as you help me, I'm going to help you, and I ought not to look down on you, nor look up to you. I ought to treat you as my equal, even though we have different sets of needs. Okay? So here, as Jesus was being watched, verse 7 says, when he noticed how the guests picked the place of honor at the table, he told them this parable. Because humans wants to be viewed as more important, because in society, some call it caste system, some call it, various terms, but the fact of the matter is, people always want to be more important than the next person. People will always use different measures, different standards to differentiate themselves from the next person and place themselves higher. You let a group of people come into a place, all of a sudden, if they see within this place, the place of honor is to be in front, they want to be in front. Because they're not among the lowlies. They don't want to be associated with the lowlies. So they want to be in front. Or if they see, okay, what people celebrate here is A, B, and C, then they want to do that. That's what they want to be involved with. Because they want to be viewed as being honored and respected. But being a Christian should help us get rid of that mentality. It's not going to come out easy. You're going to have to fight it because it's so ingrained within us to operate in the world that way. You have to be consciously rooting that out of your system. When you come into a place, you know what I love about the story when they came to arrest Jesus? Even though it was night, I know I make room for that. You know what I love about it? Because they didn't know who Jesus was, they had a hard time finding Jesus. They had a hard time finding Jesus because he was pretty much like the others. So much like the others, somebody who knew him had to say, yeah, that's the leader. That's the leader. Tell me, in most places, if that's how the social norm goes. In most places, you could tell who's the honored one. Right? Most places, when you show up, well, I can't afford those robes anyway, but, maybe I should do that. Show up here with my purple robe and says, yes, my daughter, the Lord bless you, let me touch you, let me bless you. So by the time anybody show up here, that was there's no mistaking it. He's the pastor. I love during the weekdays when I'm sitting here, somebody called, or sometimes people show up and I'm engaging in conversation with them. And then they'll talk with me about different things, and then afterwards, and I'll take them places and do things. And then sometimes somebody else would come and say, hey, pastor. It's like, you the pastor? I'm like, why are you surprised? Why are you surprised? As if to say that there's certain place I don't want to go there, but let me give them the benefit of the doubt and say one aspect of, as if to say that, okay, the pastors shouldn't be involved in certain things. There's certain things that are beneath them. That's bogus. We are servants, my brothers and my sisters. A need in front of you, you could do it. It doesn't matter what your title is. You take the towel and you get it done. But don't sit around and say, well, look at my title. No, because your title is nothing. You are servants. The world don't behave that way. But Christians should begin to make those changes in society where people say, whoa, you're the CEO? And you take time out to do this for me? You're the boss, and you actually, yeah. Because I'm not any more important than you. I'm just playing a role. I'm just as important as you are. And I always love this couple of analogies. You could be the best surgeon there is. You could work in the best hospital there is. You could do your majestic work. The guy and the woman who overslept, who's tired and overworked, if they didn't clean the tools that most people stump their nose at, if they didn't clean the tools and they let germs take root in those tools, and because most people are going to get the most, applaud and so on and so forth, and then you finish your work and you come to the family, you tell the family, well, I did a wonderful job, I'm so-and-so, look at my title, look at when I went to school, I do all this stuff, and then you came to the best institution and so on and so forth, and then, in fact, it was almost like the people who just clean your office, clean all this stuff, you don't even acknowledge them because who are they? They're lowlies. I mean, they don't contribute anything. I did all the stuff by myself, and look at what we. You'll be telling a lie to the family. Because no sooner as your job is done, when infections set in, you are as strong as your weakest link. Learn that. You are strong as your weakest link. So, in an institution that looked down on the lowlies, Jesus took that role because Jesus knows we are as strong as those who are the least among us. Okay, don't listen to what other people are saying. Well, we strong, we this, we the number. Bogus. The number one evaluation is how do you treat the low people among you. That's what God cares about. You ignore them, you could have all those other things, but in God's mindset, you're not as number one as you want to claim you are. You're not as great of an institution as you want to be. So if you're the highest person in the place, you got to set the tone and let people see at the foot of the cross, there are no difference. I just happen to play one role because I need you just as much as you need me. Because there are a whole lot of things. For me to be able to do certain things, I'm relying on you to do your part. And if you don't do your part, the whole system collapses. Take the role of, what people say of people who collect garbage or whatever. Let them not to do their job. Can you live in that place? No. So where do we get off? Thinking that somehow some people have more honor than others, and then they begin to behave like that. The same Pharisees who's going to chastise Jesus for doing a good deed on the Sabbath, right? It's the same Pharisee who's going to turn around, people jockeying for position. Jockeying for position. Jesus is like, what is going on here? You telling me I cannot do a good deed on the Sabbath, but yet in your place, people are jockeying for position, and it's okay, and this is good religious folks. Sunday morning after Sunday morning, people gather and get all excited. But folks is like, this is a pair of Gucci shoes I got on. Oh, this suit here, it's very expensive, and I sat next to somebody, I just don't want to rub shoulder with them, And you go into heaven, and my brothers and my sisters, listen, it didn't matter what place of privilege you've encountered in society. True humility as a Christian is to leverage that to advance the cause of those who cannot help themselves. If you could afford to be the number one person or very important person, then folks ought to see you leverage those opportunities, leverage those power to make the cause of others to be heard. So, and I know people want to make Jesus this guy who didn't worry about what's happening in society, but that's not true. Jesus just didn't make it political in a sense like favoring one group over another. Jesus just showed up and says, you know what? You guys are a bunch of, even though you're feeding me dinner, but I'm here, you may not invite me again, I don't care, but I'm still going to tell you, you guys are a bunch of phonies here, hiding behind the religious things to keep doing some nonsense, okay? Because there ought not to be some jockeying here. If we can't get rid of it here, what do we expect in society? What do we expect in society if we can't get rid of people think they're more important than others, even in the house of the Lord? Then what do you expect from society? If I sing your praises everywhere I go. Especially when I go for breakfast, there's a guy who owned a business down the street. He told me, he says, I respect these people. They hired you. I'm like, what do you mean? He says, they hired you and make a bold step when most people wouldn't even bother with that. Most churches wouldn't even do that. Most churches congregate around those who reflect them, okay? If it's a bougie church, they hire a bougie pastor. If it's a working class church, then they get who will reflect that. If it looks this way, then that's who they get. But he says, they made a bold statement by bringing somebody who doesn't look like them, and allow them to be led. And he says, some of your parishioners come here, and then they talk highly of you, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate hearing that. And so, society is paying attention. Society is paying attention and see if the message of Christ really has the power to change our hearts. If the message of Christ really has the power to change how we behave towards one another. But if it doesn't, then why offer people things that don't matter? They already got all this stuff. They know it doesn't work. What I'm saying is, this church, what I love about it is the fact that you guys allow me to be myself. You accept me as I am, and I praise God for that. And I praise God, and that's why a lot of people who come here, the majority of the time, the social norms make them think twice. Make them.
You accept us as we are as well.
That's true. That's true. But the social norms make them think twice because in a lot of places, they wouldn't make that move. But you make the move, so when they come and say, well, he's the pastor, that's what changed society, when the church began to do what's right, and the church realized right for right, wrong for wrong. So Jesus disturbed the social norm of his people. Even though he was eating He was at that table, but he says, listen, you can't do this. Because you show up and you just want to be more important even at this place. And then later on, he goes on to say, when he chastised both of them, he says, when you get invited to a place, okay? If you're important, if you're somebody of significance, you don't need to be flaunting it. You don't have to. Because if you do that, you're just patronizing other people. If somebody of importance, you should feel comfortable within your own skin to take the place with the lowlies to make them think that, okay, it's okay to be here. It's okay. To walk places where they live their lives, even for 5 minutes, to let them know it's okay to be here because we're all in the same train. But when you couldn't take 5 minutes and coach, then you make people who cannot even afford coach think twice about their value in life. If you're at the highest, you should be able to step down and walk among the people, live with them, eat the stuff. But what is the social norm? If you're important, then you go through different doors, you operate differently. Jesus says, don't do that. Don't do that. It's wrong. Secondly, to the host, Jesus saved his best for last. He said, listen, this is bogus. You got means, and you're gonna invite people who really don't need your food. You're gonna invite people who really don't need your food and celebrate and waste things on people who really don't need your food when I bless you with means so you could better those who really need it. Oh, you're going to get in trouble thinking about this message because you're going to be a radically different person. Think about this. On Thursday, I preach a preview of this sermon. I said, listen, most of us do this, so I'm not preaching at you. When we have dinners, who do we normally invite? People who could repay us. But there's some people that will never eat some of the stuff that you're able to eat every day and take it for granted. One day, you could change their life completely by just saying, okay, you know what? I enter this restaurant all the time. I eat. I don't even think about it. In fact, most of the time I go there and I'm criticizing their food because their service is horrible because, I'm used to this kind of stuff. But that people, they experience that stuff vicariously through you by watching you going in there. And, have you ever thought for a minute some days and says, you know what? I'm just gonna answer somebody's prayer, just out of the blue because I can and I'm not gonna lose my livelihood. And that's just, hey, come here. Come and have dinner with me. You know how drastically that would change that person's life? You don't think about it because you hang out with people. When you invite, you say, well, let me look at my schedule. If you got a schedule to keep, then you're doing good. So, look at your closet. I'm guilty of that. Come Christmas, you're going to get a bunch of gifts. Truth be told, to some extent, you wish they didn't give it to you. Am I lying? Jesus says, don't do that, don't do that. I give you these things so you could look for people who really need it, so you could bless them. But when you keep it and recycle them among people who don't need it, it's a waste. So, as believers, we ought to begin to think about this kind of stuff. I warned you. I'm going to challenge you to the point where you start thinking about, how our Christian life changed the way in which we live in society. And Jesus says, when you invite people, go by the highways, look for folks, the things that Their prayers are prayers that you could answer and not fall asleep worrying about it. So Jesus says, when you're about to invite people, think about those who don't have things. When if you see your signature means something, then make it work for those who cannot speak for themselves. If you know what I'm saying. Out of your gift set, you'll create abundance. Okay? Whatever you do, I'm not telling you to get rid of it. If you got means, keep doing the things that you're doing to get the means. But true humility doesn't mean you get rid of it. True humility means you use your means to better the life of others. Okay? If you're a writer, people pay you a lot of money, don't stop writing and say, well, I want to preach. No, don't do that. Keep writing. Take the money so when you hear of a cause, for struggling pastors like me, they can say, you know what? I could help you, Pastor. I could help you. I could help you and not lose any sleep. Okay? And if you live in a neighborhood where things are a little safe, I'm not telling you to move out to the ghetto or whatever it is. No, don't do that. Go. Pick a kid from the ghetto. Give him a little reprieve from that moment, from his everyday living. It says, come and see. You might just change his life or her life. If you very, very, there's one guy I was talking to the other day, and he was a top executive, and he's getting ready to retire. And we were talking. I says, what are you going to do? He says, I'm just transitioning from one thing onto the other. So now I'm going to be able to leverage what I've learned, what I've done, to just mentor kids who could not afford me when I was working where I was working, but now, I could make that available to them. So that's what it means to live the Christian life, not to get rid of what you have, but realize the Lord gave those things to you so the people who couldn't go there, you'll meet them because you're going to be looking for them. You're going to be looking for them. And folks will look at you and say, you do what? Yeah, that's what I do. Because I'm a Christian. And I know to whom much is given, finish it with me, much is required. I told you Jesus lived in disguise among us. Some of us thought I was lying. Read Matthew, the 25th chapter. You will see what I'm talking about. It says, at the end of everything, people will come and says, when did we see you hungry? It says, when you saw that hungry person, you didn't do anything about it. When were you in prison? When you heard of prison issues every day and then you never let it move you? When did we visit you in the hospital? When you heard of those issues every day and you did not do anything about them? And then the one who was living the right way was says, wow, I'm glad I did all those things even though I didn't know it was you. And the ones who lived the wrong way was says, had we known it was you, we would have done all this stuff. So I'm warning you, God disguised God's self among the lowly of our world. If you want to see the face of Jesus, see those who can't help themselves and begin to do something about it. I'm not asking you to change the entire world. I'm just asking you to make one move, add value to one more person that you can, and you'll be glad for it because it is in taking care of these folks that you show your love for God. Now, people will tell you, well, true Christianity doesn't involve that. It involves a bunch of other things. Yes, there are other things, but how you treat others has a direct connection to your love of God. So, if Christians live their life with the Christian, the spiritual values that we claim, socially, people should begin to get a foretaste of what heaven is like by having us as their friends, by having us as their bosses, by having us as their community members, because they should notice a difference. So, as we get ready to pray, think about what it means to love Jesus and live it out in a horizontal plane with the people you're going to meet every day. When you see the eyes of those who are suffering, to help you help them see the eyes of Jesus. When you hear about people who are in peril, who cannot help themselves, think of them as Jesus going through those things. Then you'll get the motivation, you'll get the desire to do something about it. And when everything is said and done, you'll be glad that you've done so, because Jesus disguised himself among those who cannot help themselves in your society. You know, don't worry about what political solutions people are offering. I'm not interested in that. But look at the heart of Jesus and how you could help that individual. Because Jesus did not die for political institutions. He died for what? His church. For you and I. If we're not willing to make the difference, don't worry about these other institutions. Because we got no business asking of them what we're not willing to do within the context of a church. So let us go out and be the light and the salt that Jesus wants us to be. So I think Seekonk, Attleboro, North Attleboro, Rehoboth, Cranston will be a much better place today going forward, because there are a lot of rescuers coming with help to serve those who are in need. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come before you this morning to say thank you. Thank you for your grace and your mercy that you extend to us every day. Thank you for the fact that you loved us immeasurably. You loved us in ways that we can't even imagine. Thank you for the fact that you made us aware of who you are and where you lived and what you do. Let us not take for granted the opportunities given to us, but let us be appreciative of them. Let us be humble and leverage them to help those who are in need. Because as we help them, they will also be able to help us. Because you create within them the capacity to help, as we have the capacity to help them. Lord, we thank you for this gathering, and it is in the name of your Son, Jesus the Christ, we pray. Amen.